It was a beautiful, warm weather outside. On this day, a young boy and a girl were finally able to go on a date. They enjoyed every minute they spent together, eating ice cream and talking about the future. They hadn't been able to get out on a date for a long time because they were both studying and had to take tests at the end of every month, and they need to prepare well for them to get a good grade. But their perfect day was ruined by a truck driver who lost control of the vehicle. People around them started to panic and tried to escape the possible consequences. As a result, the truck flew onto the sidewalk where there were many people and children. Thanks to his reaction, the boy managed to save the girl from being hit by the car. He pushed her away from the dangerous area. But he did not have time to run away, and a truck was flying towards him. He had no choice but to wait for the collision and death. The guy closed his eyes and tried to think only about the good moments in his life before he died. But in a moment, he opened his eyes and did not understand what had happened. It seemed that he had been hit by a truck. But he was alive, although he could not speak, and his neck was numb, which made him think that the afterlife had begun. He was lying on the ground and could not move, as he could not feel his limbs. He thought that he would stay like this forever. He couldn't just lie there. The guy lifted his head up through the pain, but the picture he saw was not satisfying and not what he expected. There were many people lying around him who were completely burning. He started to think that it was a dream, but it was too violent for a dream. There were also houses and other buildings burning around him. While he was trying to figure out what had happened to him and how he got here, a living person approached him. It was an old Chinese man who noticed that the boy was the only survivor. Although he spoke Chinese, the boy still understood him very well. The man said that perhaps what happened was called fate. In his eyes, the boy turned into a small child who had just been born. He realized that he looked like a child, but no one could explain how it happened. The Chinese man held the boy in his arms while everything was on fire and the remains of the houses were burning. He was sure that this boy would be different from other residents of their city. The man ran somewhere and talked to the child. He continued to cry even at the age of 5. The boy understood everything that was happening in front of him. He grabbed the child very tightly and ran in an unknown direction. In front of them was a high cliff, and behind it were mountains. The boy could not believe that the man would jump down because they would both fall to their deaths. But the man kept moving in cold blood and jumped off the cliff. Below them was a waterfall, which they flew over. As a result, the man landed very softly, and none of them were hurt. In the boy's eyes, he looked like a superhero who could conquer all natural elements. He didn't even cry, and the Chinese man was surprised at how calm this baby was. He touched him and promised that they would soon reach their goal. They just had to wait a little longer. When he touched the child, something strange began to happen. Some energy began to flow from the man and seemed to be transferred to the boy. This power was so powerful that it began to melt the snow on the trees nearby. The boy began to realize what was happening between them. His hand was a conduit of energy between the bodies. He remembered reading about this in books about martial arts. He was very sleepy, and after a deep sleep, the boy began to wake up. They reached some building that was not clear to the boy. He could only wait to see what would happen next. He almost slept the whole time they were getting there. He could not even imagine that there were such big buildings in the mountains. They were met by Sabako students. One of the students asked how the trip went and if everything was okay. They bowed to the teacher and did not raise their heads until he said so. The man said that everything had gone well. Then he asked if anything had happened while he was away. The student said that nothing had happened, so they had nothing to say. The teacher thought that it could not be better than that. He had no news, but he urgently needed to see the master. They noticed the child in his arms and asked him what would happen to him next. He replied that Chun would take care of him. The students thought that the teacher had taken him away on purpose, but he immediately put them all to rest and said that he had found the baby by accident. After talking to the students, the man went to the building to see the master. He began to tell the kid where he had come from. It was the Jongnam clan. It was one of the 9 strongest clans, but unfortunately, that time had already passed. The boy went back and saw the training and practicing different strikes. They were practicing martial arts and showing different styles of fighting. The little boy liked it very much and watched with delight. The man laughed because when the boy was watching the students, his eyes were very conscious. He looked at him and praised him. He saw him as a continuation of their clan. Then the teacher took the boy and went to see other places. They came to another building that was nearby. The teacher entered it and began to show the child everything around them. It was a library. There they met a boy who was constantly running between the stacks and maintaining the place. He immediately showed respect and greeted the master. The man responded by carelessly throwing the child in the boy's direction. He was dizzy and could not believe that this Chinese man had just thrown him like a ball. He grabbed it and felt an unreal flow of energy in his hands. He looked inside the diaper and saw a small child inside. The master said that he had no student, so he decided to do this. He laughed and asked him not to worry about it. The experience of teaching will come with time. The main thing is desire and discipline. He told him to make this child his student and teach him what he knew. But the boy obviously didn't like it. He didn't understand what they were talking about. He didn't want to be a student. Martial arts don't allow you to get married and even dating someone. He was very indignant about it. He didn't want to study martial arts here for the rest of his life. He was showing his dissatisfaction with everything and hoped that this would somehow influence their decision. So this guy took the kid to his house near the library. He bathed him and dressed him in real samurai clothes. He cooked him something to eat while the child lay on the bed and rested. They named him Gongshan, but he didn't really like the name, and he didn't really want to become a martial arts master. He also didn't really like the food they served here, but he had no choice and he couldn't go hungry. So he had to eat the porridge they gave him. The guy took great care of him, as if he were his own son. He wanted him to eat well and become very strong in the future. In the meantime, he ate like a little bird, and before each spoonful of porridge he hoped to survive. This porridge really looked very strange, as if they had stirred flour in water. He would spoon the porridge and cool it down so that the baby would not get burned. It seemed to him that this man was a good enough person. He wanted to somehow avoid this abuse and not eat the porridge. The man did not understand what he did not like. He thought that maybe his diaper was full. The boy would not have been given up the opportunity to be able to talk and say everything that was bothering him. But his diaper was dry, and the man thought maybe he was sleepy. The boy was not a baby, but he could not say so. He did not want to sleep. He just wanted to go back to his old life. The man was very concerned about the baby's behavior and could not do anything about it. He did not understand what was causing him to cry. The sun was beginning to set and evening was coming. The baby continued to cry and almost never stopped. Night approached. All the living things went to sleep, and the boy seemed to calm down as well. No matter what he tried to say, all he could manage was crying and screaming. The man spent the whole night on a chair and held the boy in his arms to calm him down. It was very late, but they had to practice according to the schedule. The man left him on the bed and got up and walked away from the child. The kid didn't understand what he needed to do so that he could talk and say everything he didn't like. He himself was already unnerved by his crying, but he could not do anything about it. It was very difficult for him. The man, meanwhile, was meditating on the floor near the baby's bed. He really seemed to have moved to another dimension and did not react to stimuli at all. The boy was shocked that after his terrible behavior, he found the strength to recreate the balance between body and mind. The man made some sounds that were incomprehensible to ordinary people. A powerful aura formed around him, which helped him become stronger. The only thing that could be heard from him was an inhalation and exhalation. It was like his head didn't belong to him and was completely disconnected. Meanwhile, the guy was also enveloped by this aura and closed his eyes. Now they meditated together and seemed to merge into one. And then the man heard the first word from the baby. It was the word uncle. At first, he did not understand what had happened. The boy was very happy that he was making progress and would soon be able to speak. The man was also happy and asked the baby to say at least one more word for him. At first, he just breathed, and then something changed in his body. The man came closer to him. The boy realized that this was the effect of energy on his body. It turned out that the Chinese man's power was also in his energy. The boy concentrated and wanted to try again to say at least one word. The man also stood waiting next to him. But this time, the kid just couldn't do it. It was as if some force was preventing him. No matter how hard he tried, nothing came out. The man thought he was just imagining things because it was too early for him to talk. He thought he needed more practice and to try to speak more often. Morning came. The sky was blue and clear. Different birds were sitting in the trees next to the house where the boy and his husband lived, singing their songs. After a while, they flew away to their families in their nests. The boy himself tried to use the energy to speak again. He decided to start by trying to roll over and at least somehow control his body. Energy training allows for faster development. If he continues at this pace, he will be able to grow much faster. But where did these strange thoughts come from? One day ago, he was a happy student who went on a date with his girlfriend. And now he is lying in a diaper and can't talk. His head was very heavy, and he could not roll over backwards. Because he couldn't lift his head, he couldn't breathe properly, and gather energy to continue to develop and speak as soon as possible. The door knocked in the house. It was the husband returning to check on his baby. He saw the guy lying on his stomach and unable to breathe normally. He quickly ran over and did not understand how this could happen. The man grabbed the child and lifted him up so that he could breathe properly. He took him in his arms and asked him what he was doing here. He must have noticed the man meditating the last time and decided to follow suit. He began to look at the baby, but he did not look like a genius. With such intelligence, he could easily become a scientist and teach other children various sciences and techniques. The man was very happy to have this baby. It was snowing outside, although the man was already hoping for spring. 2 years later, much had changed, and it was time to find out what was happening to the baby. He was walking outside and found a stone nearby, which he decided to take with him. He didn't become much older. The boy carefully examined the stone as if it were some kind of valuable object. He was interested in absolutely everything around him. He transferred his energy into the stone. In general, thanks to this power, he could do different things. For example, he could simply break this stone into a bunch of small pieces using his energy. Once a man saw this and immediately ran up to the boy. He managed to see that the stone he had taken in his hand was just ash. He was extremely shocked. The man did not expect that his firstborn would have such amazing strength by the age of 5. The man started running very fast towards Gonshin. The boy did not understand what happened. The man pushed himself off the ground and jumped to get to the child faster. The kid was very scared. He thought at first that maybe he had done something wrong, and now he wanted to punish him. But in fact, when the man saw that first, the boy took the stone in his hand, and then it disappeared somewhere. He thought that the child had swallowed it. So he flew up and demanded to see his hands. But it turned out that the stone in his hand had turned into sand. Now the man realized this, but he warned the boy that neither the stone nor the sand should be put in his mouth. He decided that it was better not to say what energy he used to do this. The man took him in his arms, and they started walking home. And then came the moment when Gonshin turned 7 years old. He already had some techniques, and my control of his energy was much better than it was 4 years ago. He was very skillful on his feet and very agile for his age. He could also move energy from one part of his body to another. Thanks to this, he controlled his body and soul. His skills for a boy who was only 7 years old seemed phenomenal. He did not believe that it was real. The energy followed the body. This was called honing, which his adoptive father had talked about so much. While he was practicing, his teacher came out of the house. He said that the next day he had to go to the temple. He was already 7 years old, so it was time to start full-time training. The boy was surprised. He had already told him that to find the right path, he had to take care of his people. The boy thought he meant begging to the glory of the Buddha. He would give him a sword and send him wandering. The boy had heard that beggars cannot die or be wounded, so he sent him to the lands of the Shonam clan. There he can see the world, that it is dangerous for him to be alone. So he has to become a better craftsman. But he was only worried that they can't marry because of their status. But in their clan, the Chonam, they could marry, so he didn't have to worry about that. He was happy. That was the only reason he did not want to become a master in any clan. And finally, he arrived at the place where the Shonam clan was located. It was a beautiful new building, but the guy was not attracted to it at all. He went inside silently. He had started training early enough that he was already at the 4th level of training, although the age difference would still be noticeable. While he was thinking about how he would behave in a team that would be much older than him, a girl was heading towards the guy. She was very beautiful, and since Gonshin was a grown man at heart, he liked her very much. With every step she took, he felt anxious inside his whole body. She was the first to speak to him and ask if he was the newcomer. But the guy couldn't get a word out, so she tried asking him again if his name was Gonshin. Eventually, he relaxed and said it was. Then he politely greeted her and asked her how she knew his name. The girl replied that she had been sent to pick him up. The guy was embarrassed and thought it would be interesting enough. She suggested that he start training. They approached the main building of their clan. The girl went inside, and after a while threw a fighting stick at Genshin. He grabbed it, but he didn't understand what it was and how to use it. Because at home, he didn't use weapons, and he trained only with the power of energy and control. She also drew a circle to serve as a boundary. It was immediately apparent that this girl was not simple and knew definitely many techniques. The guy could not respond, because for him it was just an old stick. The girl was serious and attacked the boy. She hit him hard and tore his clothes. He thought it would only be a training session, not a beating. He knew how to fight because of his training, but he couldn't block her blows at all. She did not pay attention to the guy's reaction and continued to attack. But during one of her attacks, she noticed something unusual. Genshin was trembling, closed his eyes, and was waiting for the girl to strike. She stopped at the last moment and told him that he had no basic knowledge at all. He replied that it was the first time he had ever been in a real fight, but he should have known at least how to block basic attacks. The guy stood still and watched attentively as the girl showed him different techniques for defense. She was very skillful with that stick, and it couldn't even be considered a real weapon. He continued to watch carefully and tried to memorize her every move. Genshin asked the girl to demonstrate again, because he hadn't understood some of the techniques. She agreed, even though she knew he wouldn't be able to repeat them right now. She began to twist the stick so that it was not even visible in the air. The boy watched carefully and stored this knowledge in his head, to use it at the right time and protect himself or his loved ones. She maximized the energy of the stick. And again, she decided to attack Genshin to see if he understood at least something. But she directed her strike at the ground, not at the boy. And now he was confident that he could defend himself against such attacks. He adjusted himself and got into a fighting stance. Then he asked the girl to attack him again and test his skills. She was very surprised at his persistence and effort. Although she was sure that he would fail, she agreed and also took a fighting stance. Just a moment after the fight started, she flew up into the sky unnoticed by the boy. It was necessary to distract him from the moment of the blow. And then she attacked the boy with her stick. But this time, he took the full force of the blow on himself and his stick. Genshin was able to repel this attack and launch a counterattack. Using his agility, he got closer to the enemy. And when the distance allowed, he would attack the girl. He learned very quickly and memorized everything the girl showed him, even though he didn't understand the meaning of the style itself. After he dodged, he needed to attack. But for some reason, the boy stopped and his stick lost its power and speed before he struck. The girl asked him what he was doing and why he stopped. He replied that he froze before he had time to think about anything. So he didn't have time to think about how to attack. This guy was like a genius. His movements were not very well honed, but his head understood and memorized everything. He gathered his strength and invited the girl to continue their training. She agreed because she saw great potential in him. They spent a lot of time in the training arena. The sun had already begun to hide behind the clouds and set. It was night, but the moon was still illuminating the area like the sun. After 2 years of training, the boy acquired amazing abilities. One day, the girl decided to check what he was capable of now. She attacked him by surprise to test his agility and reaction. The essence of martial arts was a battle between two minds. He asked the girl if she knew that the distance and ways of attacking were limited. After the girl made her attack, she jumped back to prepare a new strike. After a while, she offered to block one of her punches. She had accelerated from the very beginning of the arena and wanted to confuse Genshin. She planned a very tricky attack for him. Looking at the guy, one could think that he was confused. He didn't know what to do in this situation. The girl made several turns around the axis in front of him, and she delivered a crushing blow that was supposed to knock him out. But he dodged in time and quickly changed his position. She thought he was just lucky to avoid this attack. Meanwhile, he was already behind her. But before he could attack, he started receiving a lot of kicks. But with the help of his shield, he blocked absolutely all the blows. The girl was not going to stop, so she accelerated and swung her fist with all her might. But Genshin blocked her punch again without any problems. He continued to do so every time the girl attacked him. None of her punches reached the target, even though she was forced to spend her stamina on them. She was shocked that his shield could block all her blows. The girl asked him how he did it. The guy replied that it was an old-style technique. It's perfect for close combat if you use the 2nd, 6th, and 9th forms in turn, She didn't understand how to combine the 6th and 9th forms. The boy replied that this required a new style as well. Only everything in symbiosis could bring such a result. He began to show her how to achieve this. First, you need to move the energy from the top of the sternum to the bottom. He blinded the girl with his energy because there was a lot of light coming from him. He believed that this was directly related to the old style. Although he's still not sure, the new style was quite intrusive, although the process should be continuous. The girl was shocked and couldn't say a word. Now here was a boy who was only 9 years old and saying things that even she didn't know about. In 2 years, he had learned a lot from her. It was time to show how much he had grown, but all his attacks were similar to each other. But it was the way he defended himself that made the difference. To frustrate the opponent when they failed to carry out their attack. The girl quickly changed her plan for the fight, and she started behaving in a completely different way, using a combination of different techniques. She was using skills that Ganshan had never seen before, but he was confident that he could easily defend himself against a kick. This time, luck was on her side, and the kick was very powerful, that she was able to pierce his defense and cause damage. Ganshan couldn't believe it, because he was defending himself perfectly. He asked her how she managed to break through his defense. The girl replied that she used air domination. He had studied all her attacks and how to defend against them, and she had mastered space and was capable of more extraordinary attacks. Simply put, he couldn't defend himself because he had just learned everything. Ganshan was desperate because he thought he was stronger than his teacher, but that was wrong and very arrogant. She encouraged him and told him not to lose heart. He had only 9 years of experience, while she had 19. She smiled at him and made him realize that this was just the beginning of his training. The guy immediately cheered up and started smiling. It was unexpected. He asked to wait so that he could think about it a bit and come back. Ganshan ran away from the clan's territory. The girl asked him to wait, but there was no point because he was determined. The girl thought about his skills and how he learned new things quickly. Even though she was using a new technique, he had managed to put up a barrier. He was definitely an unusual child. Every day, she was more and more convinced that he was a true genius. Ganshan spent a lot of time in the library. When he wasn't training or sleeping, he was among the books. He would sit on the floor and search for the information he needed while a candle was burning. And finally, he found the technique of domination in the air. He began to there were 7 rules for successful mastery. Ganshan was very tired and decided to put this book away for later. He closed it and lay down on the floor. A whole year passed. He had been training hard all year and did nothing but train. He learned new techniques and ways to defend himself with his girlfriend. From the very beginning, he had been losing badly, but now everything was completely different. He was able to block his teacher's punches and throw them back. Previously, most of the blows had penetrated his defense without any problems. He had learned a lot of new information and was lucky to have such a mind and memory. In recent training sessions, Ganshan has been fully practicing his defense techniques. At 9 years old, he could compete even with his teacher, although things didn't always go according to his plan. He needed to be taught how to adapt to different types of attacks and combinations, because a perfect knowledge of theory does not always help in practice. You often have to improvise to avoid becoming a prey for the enemy. He still has enough time to master different methods and techniques, so that in the future he could perform at the world level. Another training day with his teacher came to an end. Then he was overcome by a girl. She said that today was a very good training session, but he was still powerless against a fighter who used air energy. He was sure that this was definitely not his maximum. Ganshan continued to lie on the floor and collect his thoughts. The candles were almost burning out, and he needed to go get some rest. He liked to spend time with books. And now the last candle was burning out. In a few minutes it went out completely. In the old style, there was a way to relieve tension. You just need to focus on your energy and fill the inner bowl with it to the brim. Ganshan dozed off in the library as soon as the candle went out. He smelled the wax in front of him, and because of this, he woke up immediately. Ganshan realized how he could use the air domination technique. The next day at training, he immediately told his teacher that he had learned this technique. But the girl did not believe that a boy who was not even 10 years old could master this skill. If he was so sure, she asked him to demonstrate it in practice. He agreed without any hesitation and was ready for the fight. He started to use energy to activate the skill, but the girl said it was a different technique. He combined the power of earth flows with the old style. It was hard for him to explain it in words, so he decided to demonstrate it better. Then the girl decided to test how similar their techniques were. She rushed into the fight without any preparation, and she attacked the guy while he was trying to activate his new skill. Her hand trembled as soon as she touched his shield. She couldn't pierce it and get to the boy. The girl continued to attack him, but all her attempts failed. The master who had found this little boy in a fire in a neighboring town was watching. Even then he realized that the boy had not survived by chance. It was a demonstration of the existence of fate. Chun raised a good student. The girl was angry and could not accept the fact that this defense could not be broken in any way. This went on for quite some time, but to no avail. She decided to try another technique and jumped above the ground to do so. The girl was sure that this blow should destroy the boy's defense. She threw a punch that was considered one of her strongest skills. She rejoiced because the barrier was gone, but the boy was smiling because he had removed it himself. He used the energy he'd managed to accumulate during this time to attack the teacher with confidence. With a powerful punch, he threw the girl away and left her no chance of winning. He had exceeded all her expectations, and she certainly hadn't expected this ending. She had only one method left in her inventory. She activated her ground synchronization ability. The ground beneath her feet was destroyed by the intense concentration of energy. She wanted to force it to open its defenses, so she decided to call a big tiger for help. She attacked it with her new technique. She even managed to break through the Gongshan's defense a little, but he continued to keep his defense very coherently and effectively. The master was watching this battle, sitting on a tree branch near the arena. He was surprised at how the boy was able to concentrate his energy so confidently and direct it in the right direction. The boy began to smile because he realized that the teacher was failing and her plan had not worked. She was shocked because it was severely undermining her reputation as a professional. She only managed to get part of her arm through the boy's shield, but he used it to his advantage. After he defended himself against her blows, and the girl lost most of her stamina, Gongshan gathered his accumulated strength and struck back. The girl was disoriented, so the boy had the advantage. He dealt her a fatal kick and thus confirmed his dominance. This attack after leaving the defense was really very powerful. The teacher fell to the ground. She was completely defeated. He then said that the basis of her technique was different, but the form was still somewhat similar. She couldn't get up. The girl asked him how he could do it at the age of 9. The boy replied that it would be very difficult to explain in terms and ordinary words. That day was one of the most important in Gongshan's life. After this victory and complete superiority over his teacher, he had to move on. His foster father picked him up, and they went to the elder together. The boy asked the teacher why the elder had called them to see him. The man replied that it was expected because he had made their entire school famous for his abilities at such an early age. You would have thought that Gongshan was pretending that he didn't realize this, but he was actually so interested in the different techniques and the process of training that he didn't even think he was doing anything useful. While they were talking, the road passed quickly enough, and they reached the elder's house. His assistant met them there, and they greeted each other. He informed the master that Chun and his disciple Gongshan had arrived. He told them to go inside. The master welcomed them into his home. He had often had contact with Chun, but this was the first time he had met Gongshan. Gongshan's disciple greeted the elder. He asked Chun to leave them alone with the boy because he wanted to talk to him in person. He knew that he was curious about why he had been summoned. The boy replied that he had been thinking about it all the way to his house. The master was told that he was a very worthy young man and mature beyond his years. He called him to test his strength, but first he had to ask him something. The master asked him what the energy foundation was. The boy was silent for a few minutes to collect his thoughts, and he said that in his understanding it is the only great connection, which is also called a separate type of energy concentration. It is able to connect the consciousness with the world around us, forming a continuous flow of energy. The master asked how he connected it with the outside world. The boy replied that maybe he even makes it a part of this world. He feels it when the energy moves between his hands. The elder could not believe that this was happening to this boy. The galaxy is polite and eternal. It patronizes everything living and dead. In the end, any energy flows into its vast, slow stream. This was the knowledge that the master had been searching for all his conscious life. The day was approaching its logical end. The full moon was shining in the sky. Meanwhile, The master was meditating and using the energy to support his body. A teacher came to him and began to greet him. The elder saw that this man had been helped by the boy. He advised him to meet with him and listen to his opinion. They both turned in the same direction. Ganzhan had already fallen asleep in the new place quite quickly. He wanted to leave him his last instructions. His hand approached the boy's body and began to emit powerful energy. At one point, there was so much of it that the light from it covered almost half the forest. All the animals began to hide and run away into the depths of the forest. Leaves began to fall from the trees. The master was not able to handle his energy, so he had to seal it up. When the time came to break the seal, he would have to set the boy on the right path. Because this child was the future of their clan, and his time had already come to an end. He had given enough strength and energy to keep this clan going. But nothing lasts forever, and every life comes to an end. After a while, there were a lot of young children training in the arena of their clan, and Ganzhan was watching them. Everything happened just as the master had said. He came down to the children to point out their mistakes. The boy was already an adult and could hardly be called a child. His powers had grown much since he visited the elder. Ganzhan, at the age of 16, had a very strong body and was 180 centimeters tall. He began training with the children and showing them his new abilities. His strength increased several times since he defeated the girl. He could use a thread of ki that rotated his sword and strengthened his attack. Every day, he read new literature that helped him practice it. He also demonstrated his ki shield, which was much more advanced than before. Finally, the trees blossomed and real spring came. The petals fell to the ground and created an unusual atmosphere around the garden. But when they hit Ganshan's shield, they turned into ashes. The children were shocked by this skill and began to clap for the teacher. He promised that if everyone worked as hard as he did, they would be able to reach even greater heights. While Ganzhan was talking to his students, an assistant told him that they wanted him to go to the Temple of External Affairs. But he didn't understand why, since he didn't seem to have done anything wrong. The Temple of External Affairs was nearby. The guy went there on their orders. He went in and greeted the masters. They invited him in. The elder said that there was an urgent matter, but there was no one who could handle it and fulfill all the requests. He said that Chun already knew everything, so the master said that he could go now. Ganzhan had even more questions because no one had warned him about a possible business trip or a mission. He had to meet the team and help them deal with the mountain bandits. The master announced his task and wished him a safe journey and a successful battle. Ganzhan didn't say another word, just accepted the task and thanked them for their trust. He did not understand what to do and how to act in such a situation. The boy went on a hike at the request of the elders. This was his first task where he had to participate in a battle. He had already traveled quite a long way, so he thought he should stop for a short rest. Also, he was getting hungry. As soon as the conversation starts about China, he immediately mentions their delicious food and specialties. It was time for a snack, so he started to go down. He went into the nearest town, and there were a lot of people going about their business. He had never been in such a crowded place before, so he felt uncomfortable. But it smelled really good, and now his stomach would be happy. He hadn't been here for so long that he had already forgotten this wonderful aroma. This was what it was like to be a lone samurai, always far away from civilization to concentrate on his training. He needed to find a place where he could spend the night for one day. He decided to stop a man and ask him a few questions to get to know the area better. This man responded to Ganshan's request and recognized him. He realized that this guy was the master from Mount Shanam. He was very happy to welcome the boy to their city. The man was willing to help with any questions. He only had one question. He needed one bed for one night. The man replied that he knew where to find it and would be happy to show him. He began to draw a path in the sand to show him how to get to the sleeping place. Ganzhan thanked the kind man for his detailed explanation and wished him a safe journey. When the man left, Ganzhan realized that craftsmen are highly respected in this town. Since he had been told how to get to the lodging, he set out to find it. Although it would have been better to eat first, he decided to go to the lodging to get there before sunset. And so he arrived at the place. The third-generation Ganzhan student greeted his brothers. He was met by 3 brothers at the entrance to the building. They did not expect to see him in the city, but they were happy to welcome him here. Ganzhan immediately noticed one of the students. They told him he was small, but it turned out that they were not kidding. His name was Van, but he was known as the Swift Sword. They were told that one terrible brother had been kicked out of the clan and a new talented one had been taken in his place. The student asked if they were talking about Ganshan. The situation was clear to them, and they had to go to Saxhan. There was a unit there that was responsible for transportation and security. Their goal was to clear those places of robbers who were robbing innocent and defenseless people. The guy asked if they knew anything about these hooligans. The brother replied that it was a good question, and they would discuss it on the way so as not to waste any time. The matter was urgent, and they could not delay any longer. On the horizon, they could already see the building where the detachment was located. The guys got there quickly enough and immediately rushed to the entrance. The leader of the unit was named Hensi. While they were figuring out where to leave the horses, the leader was already running out to them. He introduced himself as Hensi and said he was the main local leader. They approached him and greeted each other. The leader asked if they had any problems on their way to him, and if they had any requests. They also introduced the Ganshan master, who had come with them to help clean up the city from hooligans. The leader was shocked because he did not expect to meet a third-generation student here. It was the same Ganshan about whom there were a lot of rumors and talks not only in their city, but also far beyond its borders. Hence he asked them to wait a little while they prepared their rooms. He also asked what the reason was for such an unexpected arrival, but then the manager himself began to guess why they were here. My brother confirmed his guess. It was night. The horses were grazing near the house while their owners rested and gained strength. The leader said he had heard the vagrants talking. They said that robbers were behind it, but they needed to find out who it was first before they attacked. Hence he replied that they suspected the Moynians. For some reason, Ganshan was very disturbed by this information and began to get visibly nervous. It was very serious. His brother admitted that they might not be able to do it without help, but Ganshan believed that the Moya were not strong enough to be afraid of them. They explained to him because he didn't understand that being a moist was a feat. He didn't want to humiliate his martial arts school. But it was true. But even the most skillful student of their clan could not compare to a 16D generation Masho. All the brothers were concentrating as hard as they could because this was a worthy enemy and one should not underestimate him. They say that there were only 2 warriors like them in the whole world. The guy listened to everyone's opinion, but he did not believe that they were so dangerous and invincible. The Sky Horse Majin and the Bloody King Saxon, those were their names. If he asked how strong they were, a few decades ago, one of them went up against 100,000 strong Mongol army alone without any help, and the other slit the throat of their Khan in front of thousands of people. After that battle, no one survived except them. Thanks to their victories, they received such surnames. No one doubted their strength, but whether they could stand up to them. Because they were old-style students, and there were only 7 generations in their school, they would not have a few warriors who could match them. They hoped that now Ganshan would realize the seriousness of the situation. They came to the conclusion that they would visit Harriman tomorrow, and if they wanted to solve the problem themselves, they had to hurry. The elder brother said that now they needed to rest and prepare for a hard battle. There was a full moon in the sky again, and no cloud could obscure its majesty. The robbers gathered for a meeting. Although they said that the newcomer was weak, but a tiger is a tiger. One of them asked how they would proceed. He was told that they should retreat. The other robber listened to everyone, but said that in the end, their tactics worked. A man from the Shonin clan began to hunt them down. He was a 3rd-generation Ganshan disciple, and had 3 swords from provincial temples. The only question was whether they could destroy them. The chairman ordered them to stick to the plan and follow the strategy. But he didn't order them. He merely recommended them. They were determined and wanted to destroy them for their rudeness, and then quietly retreat. They had already made it clear to everyone who they were. But what was their main target for this task? The main goal is Ganshan. They agreed on the details and found a compromise. They wanted to destroy every hypocrite in this world and make each of them pay for their sins. Morning came. The boys spent the night in the house of a local leader. Ganshan didn't want to get out of bed because he knew what a difficult journey they had ahead of, but he was still in full control of his actions and jumped out of bed. His thoughts were about whether it was worth getting involved in all of this. Such strong opponents were too much for the first mission, but he could not do anything because it was his job. Someone knocked on his door. He said that his older brother was at Halman, but it looks like he's back. The boy went outside and met the brothers there. They asked him to join them and discuss everything. They waited for the last brother to return and gathered around a small table. The brother who had gone on the scouting trip said that they had left no trace behind them at all. They acted quite unexpectedly and decisively, so the boys thought they had just run away. But the thing was, the older brother didn't believe it. He hadn't even managed to track her whereabouts during the reconnaissance. Their task was to bring her back. But how could they do that? They had sold it, and they had no choice but to buy it again. But they were only interested in where the parcel they were looking for was now. It was on the west coast. So today they were there with the purpose of selling it. The power of the moists was truly secret and powerful. But because of this incident, many of them disappeared, so the province will be calm for a while. But why do these moists destroy everything around them if they want to get something? The elder brother announced the end of the meeting. They will be leaving tomorrow. He also asked to send a letter to the main temple so that they can take some action. Everyone agreed and was ready to fulfill this task. The boys were about to leave, but the younger brother called Gongshan over. He invited him to drink some strong tea or something stronger if he had some free time. In his past life, he had had a good drink with his friends, but in this life, it would be the first time for him. They took a good drink and decided to have a snack. It was the first time Gongshan had ever drunk so much, so he decided to start small. His younger brother tried to make fun of him and said that even though he was taller than him, he couldn't drink. But the younger brother could not even imagine how much time he had spent meditating. He had no time for such nonsense. But his fellow tablemate did not think it was nonsense. He was already in pretty good condition and called him very sharp. Gongshan admitted it and added that everyone in the main temple knew about it. Before he could even prove his point, the younger brother had already fallen face first into the plate. Gongshan had not expected this end to the day. For several days in a row, the moon had been full in the sky. But this time, the clouds managed to cover it at least halfway. One of the bandits stood on a hill and watched what was happening between the boys. Gongshan was forced to carry his younger brother because he could not walk on his own. He could not afford to leave his brother in such a state to fend for himself. While they were walking home, they noticed some movement in the bushes. Then someone started running on the roof of the house they were walking near. Gongshan began to suspect that they were being watched and were trying to trap them. And so it was they were trapped. Someone wanted to restrain his movements so that he could not escape. A man appeared in front of him and asked him if he was the third-generation Gongshan disciple of the clan. Even at that moment, the smile on the man's face did not disappear. It was a robber. He had been chasing them from the cafe where they were drinking alcohol and having dinner. Gongshan had never been outsmarted by anyone before, so he had to teach this guy a lesson and teach him some manners. But his younger brother was too much of a burden, so he tossed him aside while he dealt with this thief. Gongshan has long wanted to use his new technique with a real enemy, so he began to store energy for his defense, which he could then turn into a surprise attack. The robber did not expect the boy to resist at all, and so the robber's first attack failed. He could not pierce the shield, and as a result, he just flew away from it a few meters. But this only angered them more. They planned to deal with him very quickly. He might have thought that they attacked him for no reason, but they didn't care at all because they never followed moral values. The guy thought it was an unfair fight. It was very mean of them to attack two of them against one, but he had no other option but to repel their attacks. They were sure that it would be very easy to kill this guy. But when they approached him, they realized that their plan was failing. The robbers felt something start to happen to their weapons. The closer they got to Gongshan, the more this feeling appeared. This guy was on a completely different level than the robbers knew. That's why they didn't cause him any problems. He was able to destroy two robbers who wanted to kill him with one powerful punch. They continued to lie motionless on the ground and were completely powerless. They only managed to scare Gongshan a little bit, no more. That's what they were hoping for before they attacked the boy. Now he needed to get his little brother home. Gongshan approached him, and he seemed to be in very bad shape. As Gongshan approached his brother, he saw something. There was a shuriken in the neck of one of the robbers, which had killed him. And then the boy realized that there was someone else besides them. He was killed so that he could not tell anything. He could die at the hands of his brothers only in this place. Only their clan allows themselves to treat their loved ones like that. When the boy returned home, everyone began to analyze this aggressive attack. The older brother said that he had exceeded all their expectations. They had no idea that he had such a devastating power, but they still asked him to be careful. There was a very powerful energy here. It would be very difficult to survive. The younger brother was also told to be careful and not to drink so much on the mission. His life could depend on it. While the older brother was talking to the boys, the other called him over and asked him to take a look at it. After a detailed examination of the body, he noticed something. There was a strong poison in it that was spreading through the body. Moist use it to kill their brothers after a failed mission, so it was definitely them. We had to immediately report what had happened to the main temple. But it was still unknown why they had attacked Gongshan. He was sure that his life was in danger, and he needed to be much more careful. Still, it was no accident that he was sent on this mission with them. They tried to notify the main temple very quickly. The older brother said he would contact Howman and the guards in the meanwhile. Several days passed, and they were unable to track down the robbers, but rumors of their appearance quickly spread throughout the city. At the same time, the talented Master Gongshan became an equally interesting topic of discussion. And now it was time to say goodbye. The boy had to return home to his clan. He had learned a lot from his brothers and was grateful for it. But the brothers recognized that they had not had time to teach him anything worthwhile. They wished him a good journey and that he would travel it without obstacles. They hoped that they would meet again soon. He, in turn, thanked them for their support and wishes. Gongshan went home. The boys could be calm for him because his strength was really unique, although they did not see even half of his abilities. He was upset. Everyone was going back to the main temple. The enemies had disappeared without a trace, and he had to go back to training and practicing again. He hoped that he could train with the brothers of the other school for a while to gain new experience. When he got to the city center, he stopped. He had to decide where he was going next. Mudney was quite far away, but for some reason, his soul wanted to go there. It was getting dark very quickly. Gongshan had to move through the forest. All the animals were going to sleep except for the owl. It was a very dense forest, and it was not easy to get through it. But he knew that the forest had to end soon, and so the boy got to a clear clearing where there were no bushes or trees. He was already thinking about how he would eat hot soup with rice, and then rest in a soft bed. But then he noticed that this was not the end of the forest, and there were dense trees everywhere around him. When Gongshan realized this, he began to unpack his camping bag. He took a lot of things with him for a snack because he loved to eat. The guy could go hiking without any extra clothes, but he should always have a bag of rice with him. He also brought a double UOK for cooking noodles, but he couldn't find a flint. Did he forget the most important thing? He used to be a big fan of barbecue. The guy was ready to remember his old skills. He found a small stick and began to make fire. He'd been trying to light the fire for about half an hour, but it was no use. The stick was spinning very fast, but to no avail. Gongshan realized that he was not cut out for this kind of work. The waiters were better at it, and he started to blame the stick. Then he sat down and started thinking about what he was doing differently from the waiter. How could he make it so that he could have a fire and cook his favorite barbecue? In theory, friction should generate heat, and heat should turn into flame. And then he decided to try to add energy to the friction. Maybe he could do it faster. He began to accumulate energy and direct it at the stick. He was careful not to overdo it and set the whole forest on fire. He concentrated the energy in his hands and directed it downward. After a while, he had a spiral energy, so he could do without the tree and the extra sticks. He grabbed some dry leaves that were lying on the ground. He threw them into the place where the energy was concentrated. This helped him to make a big fire that could help him cook dinner. Although it is not an internal flame that can heal the body, it does not require flint. The boy could finally cook his long-awaited rice. Ganshan wandered for a very long time. Day after day passed for a very long time. He needed something to eat because his supplies had run out long ago. On the 10th day, he came to a hill and hoped to find a village nearby. He was dirty and tired, and his body was very hungry. From the hill he could see the vast Chinese land, and then his eyes saw something. There was a hare running on the hill. The only thought he had was that he had to catch it. He tried not to frighten it, and stood still so that the hare would come closer. The hare was also watching the boy, and probably guessed what he was planning. In his mind's eye, Ganshan imagined a beautifully baked rabbit with garnish and vegetables. He ran after him, and hoped to finally eat. But the rabbit turned out to be very nimble, and dodged all the boy's attempts to catch it. But Ganshan could not let him escape. It was his last hope, and he jumped as high as he could. And as a result, he was able to catch him with his perseverance. But he didn't notice that there was an abyss in front of them, and the guy with the hair in his hands fell down. It was high enough that they fell into the middle of a dense forest. They landed well enough, and Ganzhan managed to hold on to his prey. The boy picked it up by the ears to see which parts of his body were the fattest. But when he saw its eyes, the hair charmed him. Now he couldn't kill it. He was very sad to take the life of such a sweet creature. Moreover, it wasn't his fault that Ganzhan got lost, so he decided to let him go. As soon as the hair felt free, he immediately disappeared from view between the trees and bushes. The boy hoped that the next stranger who caught him would also take pity on him and let him go. Ganzhan heard a cow crying, which meant that the village was somewhere nearby. But he needed to determine where the sound was coming from. He didn't wait for the cows to start screaming again, to be sure. And after another signal, he determined to make sure that the village was in the east. And he started running quickly in that direction. And the guy was not mistaken, because after a certain distance, there was indeed a village. He went into the first restaurant he came across on his way. Ganzhan ordered a lot of food, 5 portions of fried beef, and the same amount of boiled beef, chicken, and several more portions of dumplings. He filled his stomach to the brim. Now he looked like a balloon. He ate everything very quickly, and the owners started to worry. The boy sat at the table, all dirty but happy. His clothes and shoes were dirty and torn. And then the waitress came up to him and started talking to him in a not-so-friendly tone. She suspected that he would not be able to pay for such a large meal. But he replied that he would have no problem paying for all the food they had prepared for him. He put his hand in his pocket because he had been taking his money with him all along. But his money bag was not there. He was confused. He must have lost it when he was chasing the hare. Then the cook came to his table and asked him how he was going to pay. It was impossible to let the master be associated with the rice thief. He made innocent eyes and asked if they managed to get everything done at night. The man showed his muscles and asked him not to talk to him. But the woman stopped him because she had an idea. The guy stayed working in that cafeteria and started drawing talismans. He asked her to put it under her pillow at home, and by the next night her son would be much stronger. They made this up together with the owner of the canteen to attract customers. Many people immediately reacted and became interested in the mascots. And he is ready to give a very good discount to those who order dumplings at the restaurant. I and the Chinam clan. He learned to read and mastered Chinese medicine. He also learned how to lure luck. Of course, no one could know how true this was. But it was clear that it made it much easier for people to solve their problems. He talked about how to avoid evil spirits and what good deeds to do, such as helping him. He successfully worked off the food he ate in that dining room, so he had to continue his journey. Meanwhile, there were new problems in the main temple. An ambassador from the Shaolin Temple came to visit them to tell them firsthand about the disaster that had hit their city. Everyone present at the meeting was silent. They lowered their heads and listened to the ambassador's admonition. It was their fault that they had ignored the words of the chief priest. He demanded that they do not remain silent, but begin to justify their foolish actions. One of the masters said that the ambassador was exaggerating and taking too much liberty because they had no evidence to vote in favor of them. The ambassador became very aggressive and said that people were being killed in front of him and they needed more evidence. He got so angry that his energy started to flow out of his limbs. But it was too late. They started to act, but the main problem was different. They guessed that he was talking about the representatives of the 3 external sections. They said that not only the moists had appeared, the Sun Temple, the Ice Butler, and the 3 gates of the south had also begun to act. The only thing known about the Sun Temple was that it was the main sect of the desert. They practiced resistance to high temperatures. The Ice Palace is located in the north and studies martial techniques of snow and ice. And the 3 southern gates are the Poison Gates, the Gates of the Beasts, the name given to those who shared power over the eastern lands. Each of them wants to get the Sichuan province, but they also wanted to know who their leader was. But the ambassador thought it was a stupid question that was not appropriate. He was an authorized ambassador, so he had to answer every question. The ambassador recommended choosing Namguna. The fame of the Sword King spoke for itself. He was a truly outstanding master. The Sword King Namgun. There was no one who could compare with him, except for the ambassador, but he put forward the king's proposal himself. At the moment, there are 4 strongest martial artists, Dan Chongi, Namgun Galsun, and one of them was Yumeng. One of them refused. It made no sense for him to become a leader at his age. Galsun went on a campaign and disappeared. In that case, no one objected to the decision, but it was also important to hear the father's opinion. The ambassador asked Namgun what he thought of their choice. He replied that it was a very great honor for him, but he could not refuse and was respectfully ready to take over as leader. Thus, the members of the ancient Muram Association elected the King of Swords as their leader. Meanwhile, the thieves' sect sensed the approach of a difficult time and created their own organization in response. Gonshin, meanwhile, continued his long journey after so many years of training. He thought that he needed to earn some more money because he had spent it all. Because the old one didn't even look like clothes anymore. And this one was comfortable to move in. You always need to train in comfortable clothes to feel the full energy. His only drawback was that no one had taught him how to overcome hunger. He stopped again to have a delicious dinner and prepare for the next day. The next day, he planned to reach the nearest village. He had a delicious meal of meat porridge with dried meat, and he could not have asked for anything better. During dinner, he heard strange sounds near his camp. He didn't like the fact that someone was disturbing his delicious meal, but he had to check if there was any danger nearby. It turned out that a battle between thieves and a strange girl was starting next to him. A man with a bandage on his face nervously turned to the stranger and called her a witch. He asked her to end their conflict and just give up. These guys were going to have fun with her. They were serious and tried to achieve their goal to the very end. But the girl did not give up and licked her lips in anticipation of another battle. She turned to the frantic guys and asked if they really couldn't find a girl in the whole world who would willingly spend time with them. The swordmaster watched quietly, very surprised that these guys had attacked a defenseless girl for whom honor was more important than life. Still, for our hero, the behavior of strangers seemed disgusting. The bandits rushed to attack. They wanted to get this woman at any cost, even if he did not survive this battle. The girl took a fighting stance. She did not want to give up, even knowing in advance that she had no chance of winning. When suddenly the swordmaster decided to intervene and appeared right in front of her, he cheerfully asked the stranger if she was all right. This was unexpected, and now the leader of the gang began to worry seriously. The girl simply looked in surprise at the guy who was shorter than her. Within a moment, our hero used the instant moon technique, and the battlefield was illuminated with purple light. Because of this technique, the bandits were never able to approach them. The instant month scattered all the guys who were within the range of the technology. No one could understand what was happening. The bandits began to panic because of this unfamiliar technology. Only their leader understood what was happening, and he asked the guy why Shonam's student intervened in someone else's battle. But for our hero, it was obvious he could not leave this girl who found herself in a difficult battle against the villains. He considers himself a fair master, so he cannot allow such disrespectful attitude towards defenseless girls. However, this dialogue dragged on, and he suggested returning to the battle. A magical aura appeared around the guy again. He began to use a technique called Teolkagan. The strangers recognized this and stared at the enemy in bewilderment. The master was surprised that the villains knew about the fighting techniques of the basic school, so he asked who they were. But the leader of this group did not care about the strength of the enemy, and he furiously gave the order to his guys to start the battle. A large number of fighters went to fight their only opponent. The calm guy was not afraid and began to use the 5 seals of thunder. After that, he used the 5 heavens technique and protected himself from the enemy's attacks. The situation became more and more difficult, and the villains began to panic. Their leader nervously rushed to attack. He decided that he could cope with such an incredible opponent alone. Using all his strength, he rushed into battle. But the unfamiliar master easily stopped and annulled his attack. Within a moment, he launched a counterattack, using one of his techniques. Using such incredible power, the master was able to deal with all the enemies in one attack. After the fight was over, he admitted that he most likely overdid it, and now all his opponents were destroyed. It was bad, and he clenched his fist nervously. On the other hand, he managed not to lose his mind, but this was only thanks to hard training. After his thoughts, he looked towards the wounded girl and asked if she was okay. Yet after he joined this battle, not a single fresh scratch appeared on the girl. She thanked the stranger for such courage. The friendly master came closer to the stranger and said that she looked quite strong. It seemed to him that earlier, she had already killed a couple of the villains and immediately ran away from them. This compliment brought joy to the girl, and she replied that this was a common thing for her, and such guys could not withstand even one blow from her. After that, she began to make excuses and talk about what happened earlier, but was distracted by what the master was doing. He had something more important to do than their conversations. He asked the surprised girl to wait until he finished. The guy began to pray. It turns out that he buried the bodies of his enemies. With a smile on his face, he explained to the girl that everyone deserves peace, no matter what they are. After that, he said that he noticed that the girl was wounded, so he offered to go with him to his established camp nearby. He was going to treat the wounds of the pretty stranger. Despite his appearance, he somehow happened to study healing and is now able to help her. The surprised girl looked at the back of her new comrade and noticed that he was not at all like other masters. On the way to his camp, the student Chanam asked the girl if she was embarrassed by the fact that he called her little sister. He suggested addressing her as a friend on the path of self-improvement. The second option turned out to be too crazy, and the girl agreed that he would continue to call her sister. Genshin was pleased with the answer and introduced himself, after which he asked what his sister's name was. The girl was a little confused by this question. After that, she sadly and shyly replied that her name was Seol-hee. Then the guy asked how old she was. It seemed to him that she was the same age as his sister. This surprised the girl, since she was over 30 years old. Genshin replied that he is only 18 now, but his sister is 10 years older than him. So he immediately remembered her when he saw Seol-hee. These judgments seemed strange to the girl, but she simply agreed with him and moved on. When suddenly they stopped, Seol-hee turned dissatisfied to her comrade. She did not even think that this was that very convenient camp. She was disappointed because she didn't think that the master would lie to her. But the guy began to make excuses and said in his defense that it was not a lie, because he has a fire and there are no wild animals nearby. After that, he shouted with incredible admiration that in his camp, there was even a starry sky right above his head. In addition, he prepared delicious porridge for dinner, and that's why this place is simply wonderful. The satisfied guy sat down next to the fire and said that there couldn't be anything better in the wilderness. After that, he invited his friend to sit next to him. But unexpectedly for him, Seol-hee grabbed her stomach and fell to her knees. She was exhausted and injured, and the girl began coughing up blood. It turned out that she was poisoned, and it was precisely because of this that she could not deal with the bandits without the help of Genshin. The guy decided not to hesitate and asked her to give her hand. He needed to check her pulse. The girl replied that there was no need to worry so much. She was sure that she could handle it herself. But the caring guy said with a smile that perhaps her internal organs were damaged, and besides, it was not so easy to cope with poisoning on your own. He believed that it was possible for them to suppress the poison with inner strength. When suddenly a blue aura appeared around the girl, she was concentrated and began to use her technique. She really didn't lie and began to get rid of the problem. The girl easily removed the poison. The surprised guy did not understand how she could do this, because he knew that this was only possible after 120 years had passed. Genshin stepped aside a little. He didn't know who this girl was. It turns out that Seol-hee was sold to, Hwangun School at the age of 10. This school was famous for its great knowledge of the dark arts. Its followers were able to absorb yin and yang energy. 50 years after its founding, the school fell under the onslaught of enemies. Its founder was seriously wounded by a mace and then died. At that time, Seol-hee was only 15 years old, by which time she had already become a first-class warrior and learned how to masterfully draw energy from people. After these events, many villains tried to master the secret scriptures about the dark spiritual practices and martial arts of the Em Hwangun School. As a result, the scriptures passed into the hands of Seol-hee. By the age of 30, the woman had mastered this knowledge and became one of the 16 strongest. Having absorbed the energy of the earth, she removed the poison from herself in the blink of an eye. The guy decided to make sure that this was true and touched the liquid that was on the stone next to the girl. It turned out that it really was poison. He asked the girl if everything was okay. Seol-hee warned the guy that he should be careful with this poison, because one drop is enough to kill a cow. Suddenly, right before her eyes, the guy absurdly stuck his finger with poison into his mouth. After that, as if nothing had happened, he simply folded his hands in front of him and sadly answered that this liquid was really poisonous. The confused girl did not know what to answer him. He turned to his sister with a smile and called her strong, since she was able to remove such an effective poison. But the girl again did not know what to answer, because she was still shocked by the behavior of her friend. After Seol-e was cured, they returned to camp. Gongchan cared very much about his new sister and said that she was probably tired after fighting the villains and getting rid of the poison. He suggested that she rest and restore her chi energy. The pretty girl calmly replied that she was not tired. But the guy didn't think so, since he knew that this poison was quite dangerous. He understood that considerable abilities were needed to resist such an action. He perfectly analyzed the situation and said that, according to his calculations, it would take a lot of strength to counteract such a poison. And therefore it turns out that the girl's vital energy remained for only 30 years, sighing heavily. Seol-e replied that she didn't have any more years left. Friendly Gongchan handed her a bowl of porridge and suggested she eat and then renew her energy. The girl sat down next to him, but still refused this offer. Gongchan asked why she didn't trust him. The troubled friend replied that people are unpredictable, and she was only recently able to get rid of the persecution. So in her place, it was normal to be careful. In addition, she was worried about the strangeness of the guy's behavior. She asked him if he was really a master. Looking at the delicious porridge, he replied that he was indeed a master, although not quite an ordinary one. In fact, he didn't care about this girl's trust. He didn't help her for that at all. Gongchan believes that the more good deeds you do, the purer your karma will be, and it is possible that through such actions, he will get closer to the Tao. The cheerful guy noticed that he apparently interested the girl, since she asked him a lot of questions. Remembering her recent fight, he was confident that he had done the right thing. Still, he could not leave the girl to be torn to pieces by a huge crowd of armed men. But Seol-e didn't think so. The worried girl said that if they traveled together, they would both be killed. So she decided to leave. She was surprised by Gongchan's naivety, because the villains she fought were dishonest and had no mercy. Nervously biting her lip, she said that against these guys they had no chance of survival. Not understanding the guy's confidence, in the blink of an eye she extended the blade towards his stomach. Afterwards, Seol-e asked what he would do if she pierced his stomach while was sleeping. The guy replied with a kind smile that it was not like her. The excited girl replied that he did not understand what he was talking about. Tears appeared in her eyes, which she could hardly hold back, because her new friend Gongchan knows nothing. The girl was determined to leave, and said that her energy had been renewed. It was very sad, because this world turned out to be too cruel towards Seol-e. Still, the girl did not find the strength to continue the journey. She was too exhausted, and therefore simply fell to the ground and fell asleep. Gongchan decided not to disturb her. He continued to guard her and throw branches on the fire until dawn. When Seol-e woke up in the morning, she was surprised that she fell asleep while talking. In addition, she was covered with a cloth so that she would not freeze. It was immediately clear to her that this was done by her new comrade, the guy who protected her from the villains. Gongchan was enjoying his sleep and didn't even notice how his little sister woke up. The girl was afraid to expose the kind stranger to danger and therefore left silently. When Gongchan woke up, he looked confused because Seol-e left and didn't even say goodbye to him. While putting away their things, they said displeasedly that another strong and independent woman had come across his way. But he had plans, so he stopped worrying about it and headed north. Along the way, he overcame various obstacles. He passed through mountains and forests with various vegetation. Finally, on the same day, he was able to reach his destination. A sincere smile appeared on the guy's face. Gongchan finally found what he was looking for. It was Manhwa Temple. Not far from this temple is the village of Namso. Gongchan decided to go to this place and find out about ferry tickets. Descending from the mountainside, he decided that he would continue to move along the river and nothing would happen on it. The city was crowded with people. Everything was quiet and calm. There were many traders here, as this village has a port. Gongchan went to the nearest shop and asked where he could buy tickets, but it turned out that this place only sold tickets for the ferry to Nagyong. Nevertheless, he was just looking for this route, and therefore gratefully agreed to this trip. The guy asked if there were first-class cabins on the ferry. After meeting with the ticket seller, he went to the water transport. The sails were already lowered, and the ferry was ready to sail. Gongchan was able to learn a lot about the Nagyong Three Kingdoms. This place is considered very important. It is on friendly terms with Shaolin, the founder of the first temple in Changwon. Therefore, he set out on the journey without hesitation. His path led straight to the tourist city that represented Hainan province. The journey did not take much time, and soon their ferry docked at the port of this tourist city. There were many wandering people everywhere, and Gongchan was sure that here he would find a place where they traded magical artifacts. He really wanted to buy at least ice balls, and if he had enough money, then fireballs at the same time. But first, the joyful guy decided to take a walk around the city. He also wanted to visit the famous Mount Jimgen. He realized that wandering around the world is not so bad because fun entertainment can be found everywhere. His day in the city passed quite quickly, and he barely made it to his ferry. They were already sailing, and the man said that it was already late, and the guy should wait for the next one. But since the next ferry would arrive in a few days, Gongchan decided not to waste time and ran faster to the pier. The guy jumped up sharply and found himself right on the ferry, causing surprise on the faces of unfamiliar travelers. He made it and can now continue on his way. Everyone was shocked and stared at him. The guy, confused with awkwardness, scratched the back of his head and asked to remind him where his cabin was. Gongchan calmly moved on. His voyage in the Eastern Sea began from Nagyan. After looking at the map, he decided that he only needed to hold out for a few days before reaching his goal. But still, he wondered if they would meet pirates on their way. Remembering the emotions of his sister Solhi, he was once again convinced that she was right and that he should be careful on such a journey. The guy decided that it would not be superfluous for him to think about his safety. But first, he began to meditate to replenish his energy. While Gongchan was busy with his business, some noise began on the deck of the ferry. The master could not help but notice this and decided to look around. He came out of his cabin and heard that they were being asked to pay a fee. Dissatisfaction immediately appeared on the young guy's face because he did not understand what kind of duty they could be talking about, since they were just traveling by sea. The pumped-up stranger made an argument and said that a few days ago, due to the rain, the current increased, so all tourists should pay extra if they want to get there faster. Gongchan understood what was going on. Most likely, these guys wanted to earn even more money and came up with some kind of duty. He said that they couldn't get away with it, but the calm woman who understood life replied that nothing was clear yet. The armed guys said they had to move on, so they didn't have much time to negotiate. They warned that if the ferry did not pay the fee, then they would face a showdown with the bandits. None of the tourists knew what to do. Everyone began to hand over money. Gongchan was in thought because the mere sight of injustice and hopelessness made him angry. But he understood that if he got involved in this conflict, he would make it even worse. The stranger said goodbye and laughed, and wished the tourists a pleasant journey. The confused travelers did not know what to answer. Excited by such a tense dialogue, the man wiped the sweat from his face and said that it was already getting dark, so they would moor and continue their journey the next day. The anchor was thrown to the bottom of the Eastern Sea. Meanwhile, the moon had already appeared. It was light in the master's cabin. He was thinking about his plans. The guy hoped that at the next stop, he would definitely be able to find a dark store and buy an ice, fire, and outer ball. Gongchan already knew for sure that it was worth preparing for such situations in advance. But when he took out his wallet, he realized that he might not have enough money due to the fact that he had eaten all his money at the previous stop. The guy began to carefully calculate his savings. Suddenly, he was distracted from his work because he felt something strange. He immediately realized that it was ki energy. Its pressure was very noticeable, and the master looked out the window. To his surprise, he did not see anything, but he felt it perfectly. He became convinced that there was a lot of it somewhere. As it turned out, those armed guys deceived them. On their way, many boats with bandits prepared for battle appeared. Anger appeared on the master's face. He felt that the ki energy that emanated from the boats was completely different from the ki energy of those who visited them during the day. Without wasting any time, the guy immediately went to the captain's cabin. The confused man did not understand what was going on. The young guy told him that they should sail as soon as possible because bandits were approaching them. The man was surprised and looked into the distance. He did not understand what was going on, since he did not see anyone nearby. The guy continued to insist and replied that they were only temporarily invisible, but they were already heading towards them. The captain asked the young man not to make noise and said that if the bandits attacked them, they would be able to pay off. He respectfully asked the restless master not to panic and go to sleep. The rest of the guys agreed with him and did not even suspect what danger was approaching them. Gongchen realized that he couldn't reach the ferry crew with words, so he decided on a strange act. In front of tourists and the ferry crew, he threw several boxes into the air. After that, he expertly cut them with his sword. Thus, he managed to evoke delight and surprise among those who saw his strength. Gongchen demonstrated his seriousness and introduced himself, after which he asked to go on a journey or prepare for a fight with the bandits. The confused captain replied that they had not fought for more than 10 years, and therefore he asked the master if he could trust him. Suddenly, all his doubts were dispelled. An enemy arrow flew near his head. Even more enemy arrows were flying in their direction. This situation made it clear that they could not avoid the battle, and therefore the captain ordered his crew to remove weapons from the holds. Suddenly, for all the guys, the arrows aimed in their direction stopped. It was the work of a master. He used one of his sword techniques. After that, he looked at the confused crew and asked if everything was okay. Now their trust has increased, and they are convinced that the master is not lying to them. The captain continued to give orders and asked to raise the sails. The ferry was in full combat readiness. Looking overboard, Gongchen became convinced that the number of bandits was simply incredible. The villains have already begun to sneak onto their ship. They went on the attack screaming, not even knowing that their opponent was a swordmaster. 3 enemy boats have already anchored the tourist ferry. The battle between the swordmaster and the bandits continued under the light of the new moon. Not far from the ferry, there was an enemy ship with the head of the bandits. The girl standing next to him was surprised by the screams from their target. They sent 20 of their best fighters on this mission. There was a smile on her face, and she did not understand the behavior of the gang leader. It seemed to her that the outcome of the battle was obvious. She believed that their guys would have no problem getting rid of enemies and would sink the ship. But a moment later, the bodies of their fighters surfaced next to them. It turned out that something did not go according to plan. The man decided to check the situation and asked his companion to stay on the ship. He was not afraid of being wounded in battle, since he believed that he should not take care of his body as some kind of relic, because in this case, it would not be worth a penny. The angry stranger felt the bloodlust of his blade. A moment later, he set off towards the ferry. Meanwhile, the swordmaster's battle continued. His enemies had a numerical advantage, but even so, they were unable to wound the young fighter. Most of the bandits were already unconscious. Gongchen was seriously tired of this battle alone, but fatigue did not in any way affect his desire to protect ordinary people. Despite the fact that a dozen villains fought against him, he did not give up. The next motivation was that if he did not deal with these bandits, he would not be able to get into the dark shop. After that, he decided on an unexpected action and destroyed one of the boxes that was next to him. Using sword techniques, the master easily attacked enemies with parts of the destroyed box. No one could resist such a dangerous use of energy. Some of the best fighters of the pirate crew were defeated. Gongchen hardly had time to accumulate enough energy for such an attack. He already thought that the battle was over, when suddenly he heard the voice of a stranger. An unknown swordsman appeared on the sail of the ferry. He noted the excellent technique of the young master and also recognized the clothes of the Janam clan. Gongchen didn't know this man, but even just by looking at the stranger, he could feel his energy. This stranger with a scar on his face looked like an experienced fighter. Previously, Gongchen felt pressure only when he looked at the strong masters he knew. Previously, he had noticed similar strength in their clan elder, Master Sabak, and teacher Zongjin. Confusion appeared on the young man's face. He didn't think that he would meet an enemy with such incredible energy pressure in the Eastern Sea. The fighter with a scar on his face asked the master if he wanted to know his name. A moment after this question, he went on the attack. He was incredibly angry at his team's failure and wanted revenge. He introduced himself as the one who would kill the young sword master. Despite the rage and incredible dexterity of the enemy, Gongchen still managed to dodge the unexpected attack. After this, the pirate leader began to strike a series of blows. The sword master barely had time to dodge. Because of this beginning, the young master had no other choice and therefore decided to use the techniques. He released his chi energy and gained the strength he needed. This quite surprised the enemy. The determined Gongchen took the matter seriously. Now this battle has become much more serious for the pirate leader. The villain understood that the enemy should not be underestimated, since he easily uses techniques that require a lot of experience and energy. Nevertheless, the experienced fighter decided not to take risks and began to use his energy in the same way. A moment later, he rushed to attack again. The man used a sword technique, and many blades were aimed at Gongchan. This attack was incredibly fast, and the master barely had time to block it. Gongchan hoped that his opponent would still show his weakness, at least for a few seconds. Because due to the fast attacks of the bandit leader, the sword master only had to defend himself. After a quick dash, the villain performed an attack with his energy-generated blades. A series of attacks prevented the young master from doing anything other than defense. But when he jumped back to a safe distance, he finally realized his opponent's weakness. Without wasting any time, Gongchan began to use the 5 thunder seals. The young master decided to surprise the enemy and aimed for his head. The man managed to react and defended himself with a sword covered in energy. He was surprised that his opponent was so experienced, so he said that the Junam clan had raised a real monster. But such words were not compliments for the master, and he asked the killer not to be so disrespectful towards the clan. The battle turned into a battle of quantity of energy. The villain was very angry with the clan and said that their monks were no better than him. But the young master did not agree with him and believed that the monks of his clan were certainly better than some crazy pirate. Moreover, because of this man's order, innocent people died. The pirate replied that the guys from the Junam clan have no right to condemn anyone for the death of innocent people. He called them hypocrites. After these words, Gongchan was able to seize the right moment and break through the enemy's technique. The villain's sword was thrown upward. For the next attack, the young master used a large amount of previously accumulated energy. All the people around were shocked by such an incredible battle. A moment later, Gongchan was able to get close to his opponent. He delivered an excellent strike with his hand filled with ki energy. The villain didn't even have time to notice how it happened. He was unable to block this attack. From such an amount of force, the man flew overboard. He was at the limit, and the powerful attack did not give him the opportunity to use energy to stay afloat. The pirate captain began to sink into the sea. Only the young master stood on the ferry. Around him, there were many bandits lying unconscious on the deck. Gongchan was breathing heavily and could not collect his thoughts. It was his first time participating in such a fight. In addition, he again had to kill the enemy. But he understood that in this case, he had no other choice. He didn't do it to kill. If he had not entered the battle, innocent people would have died together with the bandits. When it seemed that the battle was already over, another mysterious stranger approached the young master. It turned out that there was one more worthy opponent left in the enemy team. The stranger was surprised that the young master behaved as if he knew nothing about the past of his clan. He assumed that the Jana monks had brainwashed him. But at that moment, it did not matter to him. The pirate behaved calmly and quietly waved his fan. He said that he came on time because now his enemy had little energy left for battle, and this would make his work much easier. It was true. Gongchan thought that he was too exhausted for a serious fight. But on the other hand, he did not feel particularly threatened by such an opponent. Due to the fact that he did not observe large reserves of energy in him, he had already decided that simple skills would be enough for him to defeat the enemy, when suddenly he froze in place in confusion. Gongchan underestimated his opponent, and within a moment his opponent was opposite him. The man with long green hair released a large amount of energy and began to use one of his techniques. The young master realized that he had been careless and had made a terrible mistake. In addition, he had no strength left to resist, and the enemy was able to block his hand and sword without any problems. The villain, using his technique, lifted the master into the air. His powerful technique kept the exhausted boy bound in the air. Panic began on the ferry because this mysterious master was their only hope. Moreover, their situation only got worse. Gongchan began to scream in pain. The villain, with a sly smile on his face, asked him not to worry and promised that he would soon provide him with more comfortable conditions. When suddenly he had to stop, the armed men decided to join the fight and began to run towards the villain. The captain of the ship turned to the enemy and ordered him to release the monk. Meanwhile, more pirates arrived at their ferry. An unequal battle began between the brave guys and the villains. The monk was confused because he believed that this battle was useless and ordinary. Sailors would not be able to cope with such dangerous and strong enemies. Gongchan's body was pierced by the blades of enemy equipment. He tried to withstand it, because if this unequal battle continues, then all civilians will die. He began to analyze the situation in order to find at least some option for victory. Gongchan was not going to give up as long as he had his sword with him, and as long as he could still move his body. But the enemy master noticed that his hand was directed towards the sword. He stopped him and said that he really respected his willpower. It was out of respect that he decided that he would send his enemy to the next world in comfort. After these words, the man released even more energy and pointed his sword at the young monk. Gongchan managed to grab the enemy's blade, but this technique was so powerful that the master's body was able to break through the deck of the ferry. The fight seemed over. The guy with long green hair turned away from the enemy. He was surprised that the monk from the Jonham clan was able to master the lightning energy. He recognized his opponent's incredible abilities and regretted not even knowing his name. The villain walked to the hole in the floor to look at his opponent. He doubted that he would receive an answer from the dead man. But unexpectedly for him, Gongchan still held on to the enemy's blade and did not give up. He was able to release a small amount of energy to resist the enemy's attack. The guy was on the verge of death and decided to use the incredibly powerful Seong Chingjiki technique. The pirate couldn't believe his eyes that the enemy he thought was dead was actually able to use such incredible power. Lightning energy burst out in the form of a huge column into the air due to the use of a forbidden technique from the Jonham clan school. Its use is believed to take away all the life force of the user. From such a powerful flow of energy, all the pirates could not stay on their feet and fell to the deck. The sword from the leader was destroyed into small pieces. He also could not resist. Ki energy rose from the hole in the deck in the form of lightning. The soldiers gathered their thoughts and approached their captain. They asked if everything was okay because the attack of their enemy was too unexpected. They already believed that they had won this battle. The injured man could not move his left arm. It looked as if the young master's technique had drained all of her vital energy. Looking at the hole in the deck, the pirate captain ordered his guys to get rid of the enemy. He understood that Gongchan had expended too much strength, and most likely he did not have long to live. The guy really couldn't even move his arms. He didn't even understand how he managed to use the secret technique of his clan. Blood was already coming out of his mouth. The master was wounded and felt that this was the end. Gongchan believed that death was already approaching. Along with the feeling of death, he also began to feel strange things that he perceived as auditory hallucinations. He could hardly see anything. His eyes closed, and the last thing he saw were his confused enemies. The guy's eyes finally closed completely. He was unable to observe what was happening and continue the battle. The enemies looked at him through a hole in the deck. Judging by the state of the enemy, they decided that the young master had already died. But after a moment, Gongchan began to overflow with incredibly powerful yellow energy. It turned out that these were the last instructions of one of the oldest masters of his clan. The man asked his brother to take care of the future of the young master. He was unable to cope with the incredible reserves of his personal energy. So one day, he had to seal such enormous power. All this energy was sealed in the body of the young master. The old man said that when the time comes, this seal will be removed. He believed that Gongchan was the one who would tell the whole world about their Jonham clan. After these memories, the young master regained consciousness. From his grandfather's energy reserves, his body was completely restored and he was able to jump out of the ship. Looking at the surprised enemies, he invited them to continue this battle. The outcome of this battle was a foregone conclusion, and Gongchan managed to protect the ferry crew. This news quickly reached Mount Taishan, where discussions about the whole situation with the failure of their team had already begun. In the school of this clan, only 36 people were able to cross the threshold of the master. And for a man unknown to us, it was surprising that he sent 2 of the masters. But they both could not complete the task assigned to them. For one of the clan elders, this task seemed simple, and he could not understand how it happened. He couldn't get enough information since the information was still in the process of being collected. However, he wanted to become more familiar with the situation. So he asked his servant to find out what their masters were facing. A satisfied and sly smile appeared on the face of the mysterious man, because it turned out that things were now much more interesting for him than he had originally expected. Meanwhile, Master Gongchan appeared with new opportunities in Hunan province. As soon as their ferry docked in the city, the news about the extraordinary master immediately spread among all residents. With incredible admiration, Those who saw the battle on the ferry talked about how the young master single-handedly scattered hundreds of enemies. The surprised listeners wanted to see this legendary fighter from the Chonam clan at least once. While discussions about the city's new star were spreading at incredible speed, Gongchan himself calmly walked by in search of what interested him. It seemed strange to him to discuss strangers, because everyone was talking about how the young master was on the verge of life and death. Still, he really almost died, although he himself believed that it was just luck. He was very lucky that his grandfather left him his energy before he passed away. When the last vital forces left his body, his grandfather's seal was removed, and he was reborn again with new strength and an even greater supply of chi energy. At that moment, the guy did not waste time and raised his sword to continue this fight. The most important stage of contemplating energy was completed, and at that moment Gongchan knew all 12 energies of this world. He was very grateful to the grandfather from his clan, because with his help, he was able to become a much better person. Still, he still had a lot to do in this city. The guy was trying to find a dark shop to buy important things for his adventures. He was looking for magic balls with various elements. He was afraid that attacks on the ship could be repeated, so he did not want to waste time on entertainment and began to look for ways to improve himself. The determined master wanted to become better, so that innocent people would no longer die in such battles. When suddenly he was distracted from his thoughts, the guy bumped shoulders with a stranger in torn clothes. But what surprised him most was a strange feeling. For the first time in his life, he was able to feel this unfamiliar energy of a beggar. He saw in this stranger a movement for freedom and decided that he could not lose sight of him. Being in a big city, he was sure that he would definitely find a dark shop here. Along the way, he met various people with powerful energy, so he decided that the shop was somewhere nearby. The city was crowded with visitors, and it was difficult for him to pass between the crowd. Gongchan tried his best to catch up with the stranger with powerful energy. Unfortunately, due to the huge number of visitors to the city, he lost sight of the poor man. But the guy decided not to be disappointed. A simply brilliant idea came into his head. He extended his palm to the side and tried to focus on the energy. To accomplish his goal, he used one of his clan's techniques. The guy standing in the middle of the road took a deep breath and, at the peak of concentration, began to feel a presence. He felt all the energy of the people of the city within 2 miles of his location. Among what he saw were many people with bad intentions, and there were also those who indulged in debauchery in the middle of a clear day. The guy's feelings continued to intensify, and after a moment he felt a fairly familiar energy. This warm feeling immediately reminded him of that same poor man. The guy decided not to waste time and went to meet mysterious strangers on the edge of the city. The poor man was very surprised when he was disturbed by an unfamiliar master in unkempt clothes. The young guy, as usual, introduced himself politely and respectfully. The mention of the Jonham clan slightly alarmed the poor man, but he continued to listen patiently to the young man. Gongchan turned to all the onlookers of this place and said that he had one question for them. He came with an interesting proposal and therefore asked how they felt about the freedom movement. The poor man whom the young master was chasing was very surprised. He assumed that in front of him was the same immortal guy about whom there were so many rumors in the city. Gongchan was embarrassed to admit it, but he agreed with the assumption of the stranger in the hat. The man with powerful freedom energy replied with a smile that he was pleased to meet you. His name is Hogue, and he manages various guys in Hainan. Gongchan was very happy when he heard that the leader of the local movement was standing in front of him. The calm man replied that he was the same beggar. The guys behind him could not hold back their laughter and began to laugh. Of course, Hogue didn't like this, and he calmed his comrades with a stern look. After a short conflict with his subordinates, the man became interested in what interested the young master so much that he even followed him to the very lair of the poor. The guy replied that he had once heard about the people of freedom of this city. He felt that if he wanted something, then find out, then he should contact Hogue. A man with long hair and a hat on his head was pleasantly surprised that rumors about them had spread even among the teachers of various clans of the country. He asked the young man what question he had come to him with. Gongchan asked with interest where the nearest dark store was. He wanted to replenish his energy reserves. This question forced the man to continue the conversation in a more serious tone. He was surprised that the young master was ready to visit such a place and ruin the reputation of his clan. But Gongchan still did not understand what he could be talking about. Hogue decided not to hesitate and asked the guy if he knew what people would think of him if he used the magic balls of someone else's clan. At first, Gongchen was a little confused, but then with a confident smile, he replied that the practical use of such artifacts is much more important to him than any rumors. And besides, magic balls are an absolutely ordinary thing for him. For a poor man, such an answer seemed frightening because such things cannot be commonplace for an ordinary person. The guy shocked him again when he replied that he was actually more interested in dark magic than such ordinary energy artifacts. The poor man put his hands on his stomach and asked why the young master needed this. But the guy with an excellent reputation in the city mysteriously answered that he was looking for them out of some need. He sincerely believes that if he deals with this problem, he will be able to save more lives. With a smile on his face, he said that if he studied dark poisons, they would no longer be deadly to ordinary citizens. Such a sincere speech lit a flame of hope in the heart of the poor, because most choose only one direction of using energy and study it intensively. He didn't expect that there were still such good guys like Gong Chan in the Jeonnam clan. Nevertheless, he told the young man about the place where the shop was located under the name Chan Podan. He was sure that Gong Chan would find everything he needed there. The kind man even told him about secret phrases for communicating with merchants. The city's black market is a place where you can buy almost everything. It is ruled by 12 clans and all power is distributed between them. When meeting with a merchant of one of the previously mentioned shops, Gong Chan said a code phrase and received a positive response from the man. After that, the serious stranger turned around and asked the young master to follow him. Gong Chan was very happy that his feelings turned out to be correct, and it was not in vain that he trusted a poor man who was previously unknown to him. The mysterious merchant and the curious young master began to descend into the basement. This room turned out to be quite large, and unlike the main store, there was a huge and secure door that protected the store from the entry of uninvited guests. When the joyful Gong Chan entered the shop, a man greeted him and said that they had any product, from magical energy to living people. The guy was a little confused by the incredible selection of magical items, so he immediately warned that he had come to buy energy charges. The shopkeeper was not sure whether the young man would be able to pay for such a thing, but in order to warm up the buyer, he demonstrated the power of one of the weapons, the blade of which could easily cut a small fly in half. Gong Chan was delighted. It turned out that their energy charges are divided into 6 levels. The young master was disappointed because their price was too high, and he could not afford such pleasure. He felt sad that the items he was interested in were so expensive. The man with a smile on his face hoped that he could benefit from this young man, and therefore clarified that they also buy charges, and if the young master has something for sale, then the shop will gladly purchase this thing. Tired of searching, the guy sighed heavily, because he had been looking for this place for too long to leave empty-handed. But the next offer from the seller interested the guy very much. It turns out that they are also willing to buy valuable information, and they have more than 1,000 price options for various information. To put this into perspective, he said that some information may cost as little as a plate of dumplings, while more important rumors may even cost gold. Within a moment, there was a knife at Gong Chan's neck. The situation became a little more tense, and the guy agreed with the stranger that he should strain himself and remember something interesting. The dark shop merchant warned him that if he lied, their friendly conversation could end badly. Still, it was not for nothing that he was interested in such artifacts of the dark shop, because, for example, with the help of a fireball, he could learn to use the element of fire for his own purposes. There are also ice balls, and they are most often used by northern schools. It is important for them to understand how to control ice. But external balls were first used in Shaolin, and why did they become widespread among the strongest people of the Path of Tao? With it, the monks learned the art of living armor. Incredibly, in the city of Haomen, combat energy balls were created that are capable of taking the form of any weapon. Poisonous balls were invented by palace healers to easily deal with the enemies of the empire, but they quickly penetrated the counters of the city's black market. Nevertheless, Gongchan was able to interest the seller of the dark shop. With the help of the money earned by selling information, he was able to obtain the 5 strong energy balls that were just discussed while he was on the ferry. It was interesting for him to study these abilities. He could not even think that information could be as expensive as such artifacts. It seemed to him that the story of the fight with the bandits was actually already quite famous among people from the underground world. Despite this oddity, he decided not to think about the past and happily began studying the abilities of fireballs. Studying a lot of information, Gongchan gradually began to understand the principle of operation of this force. The talented young monk was able to master this ability without any problems and began to study other techniques. Meanwhile, while Gongchan was studying the records of the 5 artifacts, the ship passed the Yellow River and entered the Yellow Sea. After some time, they landed at a small trading town to replenish food supplies and tourism. This voyage turned out to be not so simple, and Gongchan was even glad of such a stop because they had been sailing for a very long time, and he was sick of the constant noise of the sea waves. Taking his things with him, he decided that he would go further on a pond. The guy was going to get to one of the provinces of the country called Liaoning. Orientation in space is not his strong point, and therefore he remembered his recent conversation. A few days ago, a kind poor man advised him to follow the signs. He also asked the young monk to be careful and try to choose crowded streets, because in all areas of the province there are branches of the Jiggle family's trading network. The man with interest suggested that the young man go to that place, saying that he was a student of the Kanem school, in which case the Jiggle family would help him get to Liaoning. With joy on his face, Gongchan set off on the road. He was satisfied that he already knew how to find the way. He had no desire to find out information from strangers whom he did not trust. It turns out that the Huang, Jigul, and Sandong families are the largest in this place. They were all inseparable from the crown. It was thanks to such connections that these families always had wealth and influence. There is probably no need to explain why their trading enterprises are considered the most prestigious in the entire country. The huge building of one of the divisions aroused real and sincere admiration from Gongchan. The guy decided not to hesitate and walked closer to the building. The calm, sleepy man politely greeted the young master and asked what question he had come to them with. Gongchan calmly introduced himself as a disciple of the Kanem clan with a smile on his face. The young monk asked if their company had a cart that would go to Liaoning. As a last resort, he asked to simply show him the way towards the province he was interested in. The man replied that he didn't know for sure about the cart to this province, and therefore he should clarify. He invited the monk to go with him to the visitor's room. The young guy happily agreed with such a pleasant offer. A friendly stranger took the monk along and said that they had very cozy places and had just finished cleaning there. Still, he didn't lie, and this place really looked wonderful. The conditions were also at the highest level, and they immediately brought tea for the young monk to wait for an answer faster. After this treat, the stranger asked the monk to wait a little and left the room. Despite such pleasant service, Gongchan was upset because they brought him fresh and hot tea, but in such weather he could not refuse a cold drink with ice like in his previous life. Previously, it was much easier for him to endure such heat, because he could always buy himself a cool drink at any convenient place along the way. But after a moment, his good mood returned again because he remembered that he was now able to deal with such a problem. Gongchan decided to test his own abilities and use the energy of ice. He only recently learned to use this magic, but with his talent he managed to successfully use this power the first time. It turned out that such skills can be needed even in such routine situations. The guy enjoyed the cool tea with a smile on his face, considering this drink more suitable for the weather outside. He realized that this was another reason to develop his own mastery of energy use. After the refreshing tea, he turned his attention to the sweets that were on the table. Yet the hospitality of the company was at a high level, as expected from such a wealthy family. The guy happily enjoyed these baked goods, realizing that at that time people had not yet invented a factory for the production of cookies. He did not manage to eat everything to the end. As a man in expensive clothes approached him, the stranger respectfully apologized for disturbing the young monk. He introduced himself as the manager of the Eastern Division of the Jagel family's trading network. His name is Donan, and he is very glad to meet such a guest as Gongchan. The young master introduced himself to the man once again with a smile. He was surprised that the manager himself personally came to meet him. Mr. Donan decided to admit that he was very surprised when he learned that the famous immortal master Gongchan had come to them. Such a nickname really surprised the shy guy, because he did not think that rumors were spreading so quickly. It turned out that this company learned about this from its sources in Howluan City. Everyone already knew very well that an incredibly strong master named Gongchan had appeared in their country, and that he was a third-generation student of the Shainam school. The guy surprised everyone by the fact that at the age of 20, he had already received a similar title among the other warriors. However, the information that Gongchan sold on the black market immediately spread among masters of different levels. For the story about the attack on the ship and some personal details, the owner of the dark shop paid the young man a large sum for a reason. But despite such fame, Gongchan was not proud and friendly, asked the manager to speak less formally. He was a little embarrassed by the fact that, knowing his age, a respected person would treat him so respectfully. The calm man agreed with the proposal, after which he asked the joyful guy why he was trying to get to Liaoning province. The guy replied that he wanted to meet some person important to him. He also mentioned that for a number of personal reasons, he was currently observing religious begging, so he had time for such a meeting. The manager admitted that in this case, the young monk was very friendly with that mysterious man. The guy agreed, and said that he would like to train with him. The respectful man replied that on this day, luck was on the side of the young monk, since a cart was passing nearby, that he is going to Liaoning province, and in 10 days the guy will be there. The company will be happy to help him get to his goal. This was great news, but Gongchan was still nervous about paying for such a service. Still, it wasn't a matter of money. The manager simply left, and the young master was again left alone in the visitor's room. The man asked him not to worry about money. Besides, he said that besides him, there would be no more passengers on the way to the province he was interested in, so he could have a great rest on the road. In return, he smiled and asked the young monk to show the children of their family a few techniques of their clan. Gongchan happily agreed to such a condition, yet he expected something more complex. After such a pleasant conversation, he returned to his food with relief and continued to enjoy his luck. Meanwhile, the manager of the enterprise analyzed the information obtained in a conversation with the young monk. He understood that if, by desire alone, Master Gongchan could go to the Mon family, then they were in a very close relationship. It was obvious to him that the attitude of Moyen and the Jianam school was to support and strengthen power. The man turned to his ward and said that a master was visiting them, and these days he would train him. He said hopefully that he believed that their guys would be able to learn everything that was possible from their dear guest. After these words, with a serious face, he held out the letter towards the ward and asked him to send it as quickly as possible. While Gongchan was enjoying excellent conditions for relaxation, the manager of a large enterprise could not sleep and continued to analyze the situation. He understood that due to the return of the Mohaists, a resistance movement to Murim was being formed, while the influence of the Jianam school was growing and a real genius even appeared among their students. The nervous man could not believe that Gongchan, at the age of 20, could become a real master. Such unexpected news did not give him peace, and he continued to walk around his room, thinking about the situation, because the history of Kanho had never known such a young master, and at this rate, by the age of 30, he would be able to catch up with the Buddha himself. Still, he was not the only one who understood that this young man was more valuable than the entire Jianam school taken together. But there was still something that seemed strange to Mr. Donan, because Gongchan decided to adhere to religious begging, and it is quite strange that the Jianam clan so easily let go of the man, in whose hands the future of their martial arts school was. He could only guess who the masters from the Jianam school were in this case, not knowing whether they were really people who were doing great things, or simple fools who had made a huge mistake. Looking at the starry sky, he knew for sure only one thing: history would put everything in its place. In the morning, the young monk continued on his way, and prepared to fulfill his promise before setting off on a journey to the Mon family. He was escorted by one of the company's employees. He told the guy that several people were already waiting for him on the parade ground, who dreamed of adopting at least a drop of his skill. The guy was very puzzled and confused, because he did not know what he could teach those guys. He understood that he could not teach the fighters of the Jagal family the art of the Jianam school. In addition, even controlling the balls will be too much for them, because they are the ones who train internal energy, or are already capable enough that they do not need other people's instructions. There was only one option left for him. This was to train air superiority fighters. The guy decided to at least imitate the training in return for a great favor on the part of the Jagal family. After a moment, the company employees stopped and respectfully asked the young monk to go to the disciples. The guy was surprised because a lot of fighters came to the training. He was a little confused in front of such an audience, so he decided to introduce himself and explained that he had come to them at the request of an older comrade from the Jagal family. He asked them not to pay attention to the fact that he was young, hoping that he could help them with their future training. To his surprise, the fighters responded very motivatedly and respectfully, asked him to teach him one of the great skills. Gongchen didn't even think that they would want to learn from the young master, but the older guys had a sparkle in their eyes and were looking forward to the start of their training. This cheered up the young monk a little, and to begin with, he decided to tell them about airspace control during a battle with the enemy. This proposal greatly surprised the fighters of the Jagal family. Gongchen convinced them that despite the fact that these were not full-fledged attacks, it would still be useful to know because this technique would make their senses much sharper. To begin with, he invited the fighters to take out their daggers and prepare for the first exercise. The confused guys still did not understand what awaited them. Suddenly for everyone, the young master with a smile on his face asked the fighters to throw their daggers directly at him. The excited students took this request as some kind of joke, but the calm and confident young master asked them not to worry because everything was under control. Within a moment, dozens of daggers flew towards the Janam school student. At first, there was confusion on his face, and he looked like he didn't know what to do next. But within a moment, he began to demonstrate the power that he had previously decided to teach all these fighters. With the help of air supremacy, Gongchen was able to instantly repel all the blades that flew in his direction. All the blades were at his feet. Incredible surprise appeared on the faces of the Jagal family fighters. The guy asked all the students to remember this. He said that he was able to do this not because he is some incredibly strong master, but because the technique helped him learn to better control the airspace around his body. After demonstrating his strength, Gongchen began training. First, the fighters decided to improve their breathing control. Meanwhile, the training of the fighters was already being observed. The attractive girl noticed that Gongchen was really an unusual guy. The manager stood next to her, and he agreed with her words. Looking at the young monk, she asked her uncle if he was thinking about winning this guy over to his side. The man did not answer this question, but noticed that Gongchen was 2 years younger than her. But his level was already much higher, despite such words. The beauty was still sure that even in this case, the young monk would never be able to equal the gods. However, she was also not sure that even her husband could match the skill of the gods. She was still thinking about the Namgung clan, and first she needed a meeting. Despite the fame of this clan and her family's high expectations, she still believed that her premonition was much more important. The manager agreed with her words and said that her premonition was the reason for their meeting, because in 2 months, the Mon clan would hold a celebration in honor of the founding anniversary, and it would be nice for them to send her as a representative of the Jagal family. A smile appeared on the face of the young girl. She expected that her uncle would make a similar decision, but she was also worried about whether he wanted to return home. The man replied that he would do this later, when he had a corresponding job, but for now reason to return. Taking another look at the young master, the girl decided to come closer to him to get to know him. The manager agreed with her decision because tomorrow they would go to another province together, and until that moment they should communicate a little. The daughters of the Jagal clan are famous for their incredible abilities, and the strongest of all Kanho is considered to be a woman named Jihua, the daughter of the main family and the successor of the clan. With a smile on her face, she looked forward to an interesting acquaintance with the young monk. Meanwhile, a disciple of the Janam clan was diligently trying to teach the fighters space control techniques. The frightened man next to him was afraid that he might die if he did not master the 17th part of this ability. But Gongchen talked about it as if it was nothing. He enjoyed trying to explain all the nuances and risks of the technique he taught these guys. The excited man said with trembling that 5 or 17 parts was a match for death. But the calm young monk tried to calm him down and said that first of all, the master must preserve the body given to him by his parents. He was distracted from the teachings of the frightened soldiers by a beautiful girl. The nice lady interrupted his lesson and introduced herself as the successor of the Jagal family. She decided to come up and introduce herself after she learned that they would go together to the Mon family. The guy thought about this meeting and the high status of his future partner. A few days later, they set off on their journey as planned. It was a huge caravan, with several overcrowded carts, a large number of horses and guards. The young master was surprised when he noticed the number of gifts prepared for the Mon family. He was a little upset that he would be the only one coming to visit empty-handed. The guy sighed heavily, not knowing what to do to improve his situation. His partner noticed this. She looked at him to understand what he was thinking about. At some point the guy concentrated and stopped showing his emotions. It seems he felt something and noticed the gaze of the successor of the Jiggle family. The girl immediately turned away. The guy asked if she was okay because he felt something strange. He noticed that he noticed her red cheeks and fever. The girl began to worry very much. Not knowing what Gongshan would say to this, the guy turned out to be not smart enough and said that these were symptoms of a cold. The girl decided to play along and breathed a sigh of relief. Despite such an awkward outcome, she noticed that Gongshan was a very attentive monk. The guy replied with a smile that he was so sensitive due to his developed control over space. Yet he continued to think about their safety on the road. The successor of the Jiggle family was surprised that he thought so deeply. She decided to ask if he was really going to visit the nieces of the Mon family. Gongshan immediately remembered their first meeting. They called him uncle, and he really liked it. He thought they were cute. The young monk decided to talk about how the nieces of the Mon family were sickly girls when they were children. So they were sent to school, and he still doesn't know if their health is okay. Because the last time he heard from them was a year ago. Jiwa asked him the names of those two cute girls. The master was touched by pleasant memories, and he replied that they were twins named Monin and Monrin. It was about two flowers of the family who share one place in the Kanho list. Monrin's fire magic is especially powerful. Despite the fact that she is still quite young, her skill is undeniable. The successor of the Jiggle family knew much more than Gongshan. So she said that there were rumors that there would soon be a wedding in their family. The guy was simply shocked by the information he heard. This seemed strange to his partner. She believed that he knew about it. The guy began to behave strangely. His thoughtfulness caused alarm among the successor of the Jiggle family. Gongshan was still in shock. He was surprised that those charming girls were already thinking about marriage and had found the love of their lives. This reaction made the girl feel awkward. She looked at his heavy sigh and thought that perhaps he was already in love with one of them. It was hard for her to continue this path with such a thought. After an awkward pause, she turned to the master. Jawa apologized and said that she should get some rest, so she would head to her carriage. Without waiting for an answer, she sharply turned her horse and rode to the other end of their caravan. The young and pretty girl excitedly continued her journey alone, sitting in the carriage. A trembling ran through her body. She tried to collect her thoughts, realizing that she was the daughter of the Jiggle family and her main weapon was a cold and firm mind. But despite understanding these things, she still continued to sit nervously, biting her lip. Because during her conversation with the master, she felt jealous for a moment. She decided to stay alone for a while to take a break from communicating with a young guy who was attractive to her. After some time, they decided to make a short stop, so that after resting it would be easy for everyone to continue their journey. All the carts and fighters stopped. Gonshin also got off his horse. He had been on it for quite a long time and was already quite tired. He once again felt awkward about how many expensive gifts were being brought for the family. All of them were not covered or hidden. He understood that this made them an easy target for robbers. But they were saved by the fact that the noble Jiggle family could afford to harness several horses to the cart. Still, if this were an ordinary caravan, then the conditions for an attack would seem ideal. In this case, he decided to play it safe and go into the forest to look around. The forest was calm, and he did not feel the presence of negative energy. Beautiful birds sat in the trees and sang pleasantly. The young monk liked this tranquil environment and enjoyed the silence. When suddenly he heard the crunch of a broken branch, he noticed the girl behind him and confusedly asked who else was next to him. The guy immediately took out his sword and began to carefully look around. As it turned out, it was Jiwa. They were very surprised when they saw each other in such a place. She asked the master to carefully look at how faithfully she followed his instructions. The confused guy did not understand what he was talking about. Within a moment, they began a friendly fight. The successor of the Jiggle family decided not to waste time and began to use one of her techniques called the Chonkyohen sword. The Chonkyohen sword is used with more than 36 different techniques of defense and attack, which is why it is known among masters as a rather dangerous and effective technique. There are many subtleties in its use, which is why it is considered difficult to learn and control. Still, it was impossible to hide such technical weaknesses from such an experienced master as Gong Chan. He noticed the girl's excellent speed and skill, but suggested that she begin her training with defense techniques. The girl sighed heavily and assumed that she would not be able to defeat the enemy with defense alone. The guy agreed with her opinion, but noticed that this is only true if the battle is one-on-one. But in the case of a battle against enemies with a numerical advantage, you should not neglect defense, because with attack techniques alone, you can instantly lose. With a smile on his face, he called such a decision tactically weak, because this way you can get acquainted with the spiritual judge of the other world of Buddhism. The confused successor of the Jigwal family did not know what to do in this case. The guy suggested that the technique of impeccable protection would suit her. He also mentioned that one should remember all the directions that determine the movement of a body in space. That is why, when using the whole body, it is worth creating a space of absolute protection, which will serve as a kind of invisible shield. The young master explained this by saying that control over space allows him to freely navigate what surrounds him. And besides, theoretically, any person can take complete control of the entire environment. Jiwa began to understand what this was all about, because once she captured an area, she would be able to confidently hold it and effectively take control of it. After thinking a little, she understood the essence of the protection that the young monk offered her. For the sake of efficiency, she decided to rationally allow the enemy closer to her. The girl closed her eyes and began to concentrate her energy. Such talent was rare. Gongchen did not often see people who were able to master new abilities so quickly. Within a moment, she surrounded herself with a powerful flow of energy and began to control the space. Another man appeared next to them. He noticed that Jinhua really understood what the young monk was telling her. He noticed that his niece was lucky and turned out to be surprisingly talented. After this, one of the sons of the Jigwal family took out his blade. He began using one of his family's sword techniques to test his niece's new ability. Gongchen didn't even notice how this man joined their training. He turned his head away and said that he should probably go back to camp. But the young man asked him not to worry and said that everything was fine and he could look. Still, he managed to teach the Jigwal family a new defense technique. Using her incredible talent, Jinhua was able to learn to control space without any problems. Gongchen fulfilled his instructions from the manager and could safely return to camp. Further, the road was less interesting and Gongchen decided to pester one of the managers of their caravan with questions. He noticed that a rather long journey awaited